Welcome back to the channel. Today's lesson is called Catapult Power. So before we talk about Catapult Power, let's talk about what a catapult is. In the slide in the background, you can see the image of this type of catapult. And basically, in this type, a gigantic weight drops, and that creates a rotational action that flings the projectile up and over at great speed and distance. And this is the type of power that the goats tap into, and you should start tapping into it as well. So in this lesson, we'll be looking at how Novak Djokovic and Roger Federer used the catapulting process to generate power on their forehand. We'll also look at new ways to look inside the body more and to see how this catapulting process works and how it generates so much incredible power and speed. Let's get started. Militaries have used catapults for over 2,000 years. And the reason being is that they can throw as much of a 300-pound rock 400 feet, smashing down castle walls or siege protection. And this is just a standard instrument of military power. In the background here, you can see an animation of how a machine catapult works. This one is called a trebuchet, which means that there's this big bucket that falls that provides the energy and power to fling the arm and then the string and the projectile in a rotational action. In the background here, I've labeled the different parts of the basic catapult. And first of all, if you look at a standing human and you draw lines between the top of their head down to their base of their feet, if their feet are apart, they have sort of an A-frame structure, very similar to the structure of the catapult. Of course, a human being is not a machine like a catapult. So when we talk about a bucket dropping, we're talking about the center mass of the human body, especially the pelvis and the glutes or buttocks. So we've talked about this sinking process, dropping the weight into the ground and the pressure into the ground so that energy can rebound up through our body. That's one dimension of catapult power. And we've talked about the other dimension, which is the twisting torsion energy, where I showed you the twisted rubber device. So this was the demonstration, is when our body and muscles and tendons and fascia get twisted as we turn and coil. There's a tremendous amount of energy stored in this bending process and the torsion, twisting of our muscles, and it has a spring-like effect when it's released. And of course, the human body is not a wooden frame like a machine catapult. In terms of energy production, it's built around the kinetic chain, which is 32 different segments of the body, starting from the feet all the way up our body. And so as we load the catapult by dropping, twisting, and lowering, we're getting both the bucket falling and the twisting and coiling power stored in loading the catapult. That energy then is transmitted up the kinetic chain all the way, winding through our body up into our shoulder complex, which, as we've talked about in Born to Swing, Born to Throw, man has evolved over 2 million years to develop, the most efficient and powerful throwing system. And a lot of that has to do with the shoulder complex, where we can store all this energy and transmit it down. The joint inside of our shoulder is the fastest joint in a human body, capable over 1,200 revolutions per minute. Incredible speed inside. And that accounts for part of the way we can accelerate and transmit speed that rises through our body out into our arm and this whip portion that we're always talking about. The human body is different than the machine catapult. The human catapult different than the machine catapult in terms of the last release segments, where there's these fixed sort of rigid pieces except for the string and the catapult. We have 5 release segments. We have the upper arm, the forearm, the elbow, the wrist, and the fingers. The fingers being like the cradle that holds the projectile. And all of these segments accelerate in sequence in the whip element of the swinging process. So we have a super accelerator at the end of our catapult that the machine doesn't. Now I want to walk through how Djokovic implements this catapult process in detail, critical image by critical image. So in the first slide that you're seeing, he is just starting his loading turn back, and you can see that he hasn't yet planted his full pressure into his trail side. So he's just starting to plant weight there. It's not weighted yet. Then in the next slide, we do see Djokovic, how he's planted that trail foot and got weight into his trail hip, and his right hip is twisting in the socket, creating stored energy and stability in this trail hip. Now I've also put a dot around his right glute or buttocks to identify exactly what's happening in terms of the loading of the pelvis. So I'll do it from down the line view here. So as I load into this trail hip and start to turn back, this right buttocks, you see the right dot, is going to go back towards the target. There's the target. So my right glute is rotating back and down towards the target in a fully loaded situation. We don't always have time to do this full load, but we're always looking to do this. So we're, want to keep focused on trying to load as much as possible. So this isn't just putting weight into the trail leg and foot and putting pressure and torsion, twisting into the hip, but it's also turning the pelvis this way. So we're not leaning back, we're coiling around the center turn, remember? And so as Djokovic starts to complete this, as you'll see, this right glute is going to continue to rotate backwards towards the target that way. So now as Djokovic moves through the phases of the swing, where he's got the take back and then he's going to drop to the slot, we just see the sinking of the body. We see the side bending starting here. And we're going to see that, as we talked about, as we start this process, this side bending, it helps our lead side make contact with the ground. And we start the transfer of energy at that point when our toe touches. We're not there yet, but we're starting the process. So the side bend like this shifts the pelvis so that the lead foot touches the ground. And that's a critical part of this recentering process that we'll talk about in a second. And again, the glutes, the pelvis, the strongest part of our body, is twisting and coiling in this centered way, creating a tremendous amount of stored energy, as well as the sinking is the twisting component of it. Now moving further along in the swinging process, where Djokovic has taken the racket somewhat down and then he's about to spiral down and into the slot, you can see that his lead foot is bearing some weight, and he's already begun the process of transferring to a 50-50 weight balance between his trail foot and his lead foot in this sinking process. And that recenters the torso over the center of the pelvis. Recall from an earlier lesson what I called the butt back exercise. This is just coming at it from a different point of view, but we're still in our athletic posture, right? And we're still turning and keeping our athletic posture as we come down into the slot. And so this recentering is a critical phase that most recreational players, and as we see some professional players, skip through or skip over. We saw it once again in the US Open last week at Coco Golf with all the forehand topspin errors that she made. And again, what is the error is that she gets into somewhat of a loaded position, and then instead of sinking and recentering and rotating through the shot, she stands up her body and straightens up. And once you've straightened up like this, you can't rotate any further with your body. And then your arm takes over in this flat outside in swing plane, which brings the tip of the racket forward too soon, closes the face of the racket down. You have a swipe across. You know, it's a pretty fatal error, as it's proving out to be. And it is a technique issue. It's not a mental fitness issue. It's just getting the right technique of staying down and recentering and staying down and rotating all the way through the shot. Otherwise, you get into your wind up position and then you try to fire your hips or you fire your shoulders from there. You're going to be coming over the top. Your lower body is not going to be unwinding, and your top of your body is going to unwind too much. We've gone over this several times, but it's a critical thing to think about, is that we have to have this lowering and recentering before we proceed in sequence to releasing the racket. The other thing that we've talked about in the butt back posture is that we need the butt back in order to create room for our elbow and arm to swing through on an inside-out path. If you are standing straight, your arm can't swing in that manner. It'll go straight through or around the ball like this. So creating the space in here to do it with our side bend and our coil and our tilt, and we're going to be swinging on this spiral line that we've talked about so much. Inside out, using the power of the body in this spiraling action. This is what Coco is missing. As we move along even further down into the movement into the slot with the side bend and the pelvic shift to the front. Now, as we get further into this drop down phase, transition phase between the take back and the forward swing. Now our left side, can be anchored. There's pressure into this left side, and it can be used as a brace and an anchor to help us pull around our pelvis in this centered turn way instead of extending forward. This is another issue, of course, is the untutored player will think that everything happens on this hitting side, and therefore to get power out there, they need to extend their right side and hitting side through the ball like this. And this is going to disrupt everything. It's going to disrupt the rotation of the body, disrupt the contact point. It's never a good thing. So once we've come out of the slot in a recentered way, we have weight transferring into our lead side. We have pulling from our non-hitting side that's going to help power the upper part, but the unwinding sequence always begins with the lower body. The lower body always moves first, so even as you're coming down, your lower side is starting to open up, going this direction. And with the anchoring in our lead leg early, players can still do a little bit of a pullback back here on their torso, so they're creating a bigger stretch. As their lower body unwinds, they're still pulling back and stretching back like this. Once again, loading the catapult even further. Now, as the lower body leads the unwinding of the body, unwinding of the hips first, followed by the unwinding of the upper body. As we talked about, this left leg can act as a brake, an anchor to the hips just completely turning around here. We'd lose all of the energy and power if we just rotated around, turned around. So this left leg, lead leg, breaks and stops the rotation of the pelvis. And as that's stopping, then that helps propel the upper unwinding to go much faster. And so we talked about also on the hitting side, where everything is external rotation back here to the slot, then everything moves into internal rotation to unwind into the hitting and forward swing. And to make things just a little bit more complicated, we talked about how in the process of coming through on the swing, the left side foot and leg are going into internal rotation, just like our non-hitting arm goes into internal rotation to stop our left side from rotating around. If we had external rotation, there'd be nothing really to stop my shoulder from rotating all the way through. We want to break that. So there's this internal rotation of the non-hitting arm, and there's an internal rotation of the hip. And this can happen on the ground or in a scissoring action that we see when the players leap up. But there's another important component of this movement mat that we haven't talked about, and virtually I've never seen it talked about in other tennis instruction. So in addition to this internal rotation of the lead leg and foot breaking and stopping the continuing rotation of the hips, there's also an important power generation component of that move, which is that this lead leg will straighten and push the energy that we've injected in the ground back up through the body, as you can see in this little diagram. And this straightening and pushing back of the lead side is a critical part of the catapult process that we need to understand and focus on in practice. Going back to the Djokovic catapult process, so the energy that comes up through the non-hitting leg as it's straightened and pushed back into the body first goes through our pelvis to help snap that open with more power. But that energy is then transferred up into our upper torso and into our shoulder to do what? Help with the sling process that we've talked so much about. And the incredible power that we can get from this catapult-like energy if we create the right forms and have the right sequencing to release it. So going back up to the big picture of the swing, I want to play this little video of Djokovic's forehand, where we just focus on how the hips start to lead and initiate the rotation and unwinding first, followed by the torso. And I have the tracing technology on the hips and then on the torso, so that you can see how the hips always lead with the torso following. So let me play that for you.